But we're going to look at Matthew 2 together. Now, kind of like what we did a week ago, we're going to look at a text that I'm guessing many of us have heard before. So I want to ask you up front, instead of tuning out, let's kind of posture our thinking, posture our hearts in such a way that we're humble enough to say, maybe God might have something new for me today. And I believe he does. I believe that he's speaking to you and to me, and that he cares about your life and mine. And so hopefully, even though we may have read that chapter or a portion of that chapter before, he might have something to show to you and to me. So we're going to listen carefully, and we'll look together at Matthew 2. So just hang on to that. We'll get to that in just a little bit. Imagine going to work one day, and upon coming into your workplace, you hear your coworker talking about your replacement. So you're there, and your coworkers are chit-chatting with each other, and one of them is not talking about what they did the night before or what's going on for later on in the shift, but they're saying, there's this person who's coming to take your job. And they're not here yet, but they're on the way, and pretty soon they're going to be here, and then you won't have a job anymore. How would that make you feel? I think it kind of depends on how you feel about your job. If you hate your job and you find out that you're having a replacement come, then that might be good news. But if you like your job, if you like what you do, if you like the people that you work with and so forth, then I'm guessing you're probably going to fight for your job like that third monkey was trying to fight to get onto the ark. You're not wanting to lose your job at all. Losing a job, if you've experienced that before, you know it's really painful. For whatever reason it is that you may have lost your job one way or another, it can be terrifying. It can be wounding. It can have this lasting effect upon you, upon the way that you think as you're applying for other work later, and it hurts deep down inside. We have an example of what it was like for someone to find out that their job replacement was coming. And so I want to show you a little piece of history and then tie that into just what we read in Matthew 2, and they fit perfectly together. Surprise, surprise. But there's this historical record that was written by the first century Jewish historian Flavius Josephus. I've talked with you about him before. I like to tease sometimes. Flavius Josephus' name sounds like something I might like to put into my coffee. I just think his name is fun to say. But Josephus is a famously known first century historian, and he wrote several different works about things that were happening at the time of his life, primarily about the Jews. And we can learn a lot about their culture, about their practices, about how they went about life and politics and war and spirituality and things like this. And in one of his texts that's called Antiquities of the Jews, Flavius Josephus wrote about an individual who faced that very same situation at work one day, and all of a sudden others are talking about his job replacement here. So in our minds, rewind that clock back. We're time travelers now. We're going back to the first century into the Roman Empire. And at that point in time in the Roman Empire, there was a lot of political instability. Thankfully, things have really calmed down and everything is peaceful in our politics these days, right? But at that point, it was a little rough for them. And in fact, not only were they having trouble getting along, but also maintaining order. The Roman Empire was expanding into various areas, into new places, and then when they would expand there, they needed to actually lead, to take control, and so to make sure that things were being done well. And so Josephus writes about this military leader whose job it was at that point to siege the city we call Jerusalem. And this military leader you might have heard of before, his name is Herod. We think of him in a different context when we think about Herod. But right now I'm talking with you about what Josephus wrote about Herod. We'll get to what the Bible has to say about him in just a little bit. But this military leader laid siege to Jerusalem and then actually conquered it. And he was so effective and so impressive when he did this that the Roman Senate took notice, and they thought, well, we really like the way that he has gone about doing this. We need somebody to maintain control of this part of our empire, because as the empire grew, they needed more leaders, more government. Everybody loves more government, right? And so they decided to promote Herod so that instead of just being a military leader, he got an upgrade. Now he's a politician. Could we call being a politician an upgrade? I don't know, but that's what happened to Herod, okay? So here you have Herod, and he was established as what we call a client king. But it wasn't just over Jerusalem, that city that he had conquered. It wasn't just Jerusalem. It was, in fact, the whole area of Judea, which is surrounding Jerusalem, and also Samaria, and then some other areas as well, that Herod became this client king. And being a client king meant he had a certain level of autonomy, where he got to make decisions, he got to oversee the things that were happening there, but not total autonomy, because he was still under the Roman Empire. And so some of those decisions were actually handed down to him and just placed as expectations upon him, so that the things that he would do were based upon some of his choices and some of the things that he had to, just because he was a part of the Roman Empire there. And he got to work right away. Herod kind of has a mixed reputation when we read about him in history. Part of what he did was like really fantastic. Since he is now this client king of an area where there are a ton of Jews, he got right to work renovating a major tourist attraction in his area, the Jewish temple. Is Herod Jewish? No. But this is a major gathering place for the people that he was ruling over. And so he renovated that Jewish temple. And he also built other things too, like fortresses and palaces and aqueducts. I don't think there were actually ducks in there. You guys know what aqueducts are, but I'm being silly. One of the negative things about Herod that you might have heard about before, or maybe even picked up a little bit as you read about him some in the scripture, is that this dude was excessively paranoid. Have you ever met somebody who's paranoid? It's not paranoia if they're actually coming to try to kill you. So he was just racked with stress all the time. I don't entirely know what prompted him to feel this way, but we see how it played out in his life. Josephus wrote about Herod's paranoia and what actually led him to do some really cruel things, some horrible things, and a lot of people really didn't like him. He was concerned enough about when he would eventually die that nobody would be sad that he was gone, so he made sure that upon his death there were orders that a bunch of the other governing officials would be killed so that there would be mourning at the time of his death. That's how he got people to cry after he died. So a lot of paranoia here, and he was constantly worried about losing his job. His fear, his cruelty actually led him to respond to his wife. Now, her name is Mariamne, and he had accused her of cheating on him. Mariamne had a brother, and this brother had a friend. And Mariamne and that friend got close to each other. And in Herod's opinion, they were a little too close. As he observed their interactions with each other, and he felt jealous and he felt threatened and thought, well, not only are these two potentially having an affair, but he also accused them of working together to conspire to overthrow him, to take the kingdom away from him. His lovely wife and this person that she was a little too close with in his opinion. So he puts her on trial. And he calls in witnesses to testify against her. And a lot of people, Josephus tells us, a lot of people viewed this trial as rigged. They looked at those witnesses and they thought, well, these people have obviously been paid off because everything that they said really aligned with what Herod wanted them to say. And despite the defense that Mariamne gave, it didn't matter how much evidence she had or what she said about, like, I didn't do it. She pleaded her innocence. They still found her guilty. And so the consequence of her being found guilty of this crime was she was executed. He had his wife killed. I have been in arguments with my wife before. I don't think execution is on the table, at least as far as I know. So maybe we should, she's saying it's not, so I'm safe. We're good. She wouldn't admit it because we're on camera and we're in church. So I'll have to ask her later in private. But rough day in the Herod household then. So in the next book that Josephus wrote, he went on to say, well, it didn't end with Herod's wife, Mariamne. It actually continued on with his two sons. Their names were Alexander and Aristobulus. And with these two particular sons, his paranoia still got the best of him, and he accused them of trying to poison him. Now, I thought to myself, if my wife were to pass away, and I still need food, who's the most likely person to help feed poor Steve? Maybe it's my kids. I don't know. But in this case, he's accusing his sons of trying to poison him and saying, when you tried to poison me with whatever food or drink that it was that you had given me, he's saying that you did this because you were trying to take the kingdom away from me, to overthrow me so that you can be in charge of the kingdom. And his paranoia led him to do the very same exact thing that he had done to his wife. He puts him on trial. He brings up witnesses that really seem like this whole thing is rigged. They don't seem trustworthy, but they're saying exactly what Herod wanted them to say. And they're like, we didn't do it. We're innocent. We didn't do it. Didn't matter. Nobody listened. They were convicted. They were found guilty. And same deal. He had them executed. So first his wife, and now his two sons, and I'm pretty sure he could kiss his Father's Day present goodbye. And unfortunately, it also didn't end there. Not just with a wife, not just with the sons. The next part that we learn a little bit more about Herod, you might be familiar with. I've read that it has been called at times the massacre of the innocents. He's at work one day, Herod, and he's just going about his job, ruling, overseeing. He's responsible for the political leadership, the military leadership, the development to make sure that there is order in the kingdom that he oversees. And while he's at work taking care of business, this tribe of religious leaders shows up. And they had traveled from far away, somewhere out east. And this tribe of religious leaders, sometimes we refer to them as magi, M-A-G-I. Sometimes we call them wise men. And I think that a number of the Christmas plays and Christmas cantatas that we have seen about these individuals kind of color our understanding of who they are. But Josephus tells us quite a bit about them. We don't know exactly where they came from, maybe Persia, but they're traveling and they get here to where Herod's kingdom is. And they show up, and it's very clear that these are pagan religious leaders. They worship false gods. They have practices that we would consider to be completely inappropriate. And they have this expertise of dream interpretation. Now, if you've read portions of the Old Testament or heard certain things about the Old Testament, you may remember a guy named Joseph, not Jesus' adoptive dad, he comes later, but a guy named Joseph in the Old Testament who interacted with some wise men who did dream interpretation, and then Joseph did dream interpretation. So same kind of a deal right there. They get famously known for fortune telling, famously known for their sorcery as magicians. So in your mind, think like Gandalf and then you'll have the right kind of idea, the right kind of picture in your mind there. And so these magi enter into the scene, and I want to show you what God's word tells us about them. Look there with me. So we're looking at Matthew 2, where I had you flip your pages a moment ago. And let's look at the first couple verses. Matthew 2, the very beginning of the chapter, it says this. Jesus was born. Yay! We're skipping to Christmas here, all right? Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea. That's where Herod rules, Judea. During the reign of King Herod. About that time, some wise men, and the Greek reads magi, from the eastern land arrived in Jerusalem asking, here's verse 2, where's the newborn king of the Jews? Who are they talking to? The king of the Jews. And they're saying, where's the newborn king of the Jews? We saw his star as it rose, and we have come to worship him. Now, this star that they spotted up in the sky, this star guided them there to Herod's territory, guided them to Judea. That's how they actually came to the place where they were having this conversation with Herod. He must have known, right? If anybody's going to know about who the new king is, it's got to be like the current king. Perhaps they thought to themselves. And so they go and talk with Herod about it. And they're saying, well, how are we going to find him? Where are we going to find this new king? I actually really like looking at the stars at night. Any stargazers? Remember? Yeah, a couple hands going up. It was just a few days ago, we had the Geminid meteor shower. What evening was that? I forget exactly, but I went out to look, and I've watched this a number of times over the years. If it's a clear night, if the clouds don't get in the way, and you give your eyes a little bit of time to adjust, then you could see what we call shooting stars, and they're not actually stars, but we can watch these beautiful twinkles as they zip right across the sky, and I'm mesmerized by it. And so my amazement with the stars over the years has prompted me over time to enjoy a telescope, to enjoy binoculars, even this one software that I've used. This software, it's called Starry Night. I really like that software because this computer software, you give it a date, you give it a location, and then it will show you what the sky looks like at that time from that location. So I could say, show me what the sky is going to look like next weekend, because that's when I'm planning to go look at the stars, but maybe I'm going to be down over in Toledo. So show me what the stars are going to look like next weekend from Toledo. And the software just shows you, here's what it's going to be, because it's all math. It's very predictable. Where will the stars be? Where will the planets be? Where will the comets be? And things like this. And it works the same in reverse as it does in fast forward. I can tell you through the software. I can't tell you. The software can tell you what the sky is going to look like way later or from the other side of the planet. That's pretty cool too, because how often do we get to look at the sky from the other side of the world, right? And in this particular software, then it shows us, like, if you want to spot a planet, because sometimes when you're looking at a star, it's not a star. Usually we can see Mars, usually we can see Jupiter. If it's clear tonight, you'll be able to see Saturn. So I don't know if it's going to be clear or cloudy, but head on outside, and if you want to see it, then just Google it. Like, where can I see Saturn? And it'll tell you, at 9 o'clock, look here, 10 o'clock, look there, and it'll point you in the right direction, and you should be able to spot it then. The software amazes me. And so for us, using math and astronomy, we can understand where the stars and where the planets are going to be over time. For them, they didn't have the computer software that we have today. They understood their world just a little bit differently than we do. And they laid out time differently than we do today. So we've got the months January, February, March. I won't go further because I don't want to show you that I don't know my months. And then in Egypt, they had the months that were called Mashir, Tobi, Epip, Masori, and so on. These different names for different months. And the way that their calendar looked and was laid out, just a little bit different from ours. And during that month that they called Masori, back at the time when Jesus was born, and from the location where he was born, at that time, during the month of Masori, there was this star that we call Sirius, U-S, S-I-R-I-U-S, Sirius. And it rose each morning with this particular brilliance, a great sparkle. And when I read a little bit about Sirius, I thought to myself, I wonder what the software will show me. I wonder if I can go and look that up. Because I'm not just curious about what's going to happen next weekend. I want to know what happened a couple thousand years ago and see what the sky looked like on that night. Guess what? The year before, you couldn't see Sirius at all because you've got a great big bright moon and you've got other stars that are in the area, and all that light makes it too hard for us to see where Sirius is at that time. But the very following year, they have what they would have thought of as this new twinkle in the sky. I don't know if that was the star that we read about in the Bible or not, but I do know that that's where the star was located at that time frame. And just 1 year before, that very same month, you wouldn't have been able to see that star in the sky. I just think that's kind of cool. So what I'm talking about a little bit now, we would refer to as astronomy, using math to measure where are the planets, where are the stars. And math and astrophysics, then, a lot of people have access to, whether you're using software or whether you're just crazy smart and you wear a white lab coat. But there's another word similar to astronomy. It's very, very close, but it means something very, very different. It's the word astrology. So we have astronomy. That's math. It's got the M in it, so you can take M for math. And we have astrology with an L. Astrology is a spiritual practice. So you've got astronomy, the mathematical practice, and astrology with an L, a spiritual practice of trying to predict what's going to happen in a person's life based upon the stars. That's why people who practice astrology want to know, when were you born? Are you this particular sign, which is a sign in the stars? Or are you that particular sign? You've heard it before, like you a Virgo, or are you a Gemini? And so these phrases, these contextual conversations then are practicing astrology. They believe that the position of the stars in the sky can tell you who you are. God very clearly tells us, don't mess with that. Because stars cannot tell you who you are. Only the one who made you can tell you who you are. But it's something that people do. It's something that they practiced, those magi. They're looking at the stars, and they're trying to understand, what do these stars mean about people? What do these stars mean about life, about our world? Not just where are they, and which direction do I look if I want to see the Big Dipper? Hey! But how does it affect my understanding of myself and the world around me? That was their practice of astrology. And keeping in mind then these Persian astrologists, they saw that star that we can read about in the Bible. They saw a star. And it was during the month that it's called Masori, and that Egyptian month, Masori, means, take a guess, birth of a prince. That's what the name of the month means. So, got a couple astrologists, I don't know how many, we guess 3 because there's 3 gifts, right? And they see this star, and maybe, just maybe, it could have been that if it was that star, and if it was that exact moment, because, it's hard to measure a couple thousand years ago, but if that's what it was, it happened during a month that was called Birth of a Prince. So it kind of makes sense that they would show up and say, we saw his star, he's the newborn king. Can you see it? Can you see how that fits together? So one way or another, whether it was that star or a different star, it doesn't super matter, but it's kind of cool the way that it comes together here. And they come in and they're talking with the current king about the new king who's going to replace him. God used that star to capture the attention of stargazers. And they ask, where's this newborn king of the Jews? I want you to imagine for a moment, how do you think King Herod might have responded? Okay, given what I told you right at the very beginning about what happened with his wife, about what happened with his sons, I didn't mention it, but he did the same thing with his mother-in-law and other people too. This was a pattern that he had demonstrated. So these dudes show up and they're like, somebody's coming to take your job. What do you guess he might do in response? Now, if you've read the text or if you've heard about it before, you know what happens. But even without that information, you can kind of guess what's coming pretty soon here. Let's look at it together. Still in Matthew 2, but we'll start in verse 3. Look there with me. Matthew 2, starting in verse 3, it says this. King Herod was deeply disturbed. Okay, big surprise there, right? King Herod was deeply disturbed when he heard this, as was everyone in Jerusalem. Pause right there for a moment. Why do you think everybody around was disturbed when they heard about this news? Because they know how paranoid this guy is. Yeah, Dave's over here going, it's about to go sideways here real fast, okay? Just double check your insurance. So, all of Jerusalem is disturbed just like King Herod. Verse 4, he called a meeting of the leading priests and teachers of religious law and asked, where is the Messiah, the promised one, supposed to be born? Verse 5, they answered here in verse 5, in Bethlehem, in Judea, they said, for this is what the prophet wrote. And then they quote from Micah 5 and 2 Samuel 5. They said, and you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not least among the ruling cities of Judah, for a ruler will come from you who will be the shepherd for my people Israel. If you've read this before, don't tune out. Remember, I want you to stick with me here. So they're trying to figure out, how do we find the new king? And the current king doesn't know. So he checks with the people who are the experts of the prophecies, and he finds out from them there are these prophecies that say when the new king comes, he's coming to Bethlehem. All right, verse 7, look there with me. Then Herod called for a private meeting with the wise men, with the magi, and he learned from them the time when the star first appeared. Does that sound like astrology to you? I want to know the precise moment of when that star was in the sky so that I can figure out when this kid was born, because if he's my job replacement, I'm paying particular attention to this kid. I'm putting words into his mouth here. Verse 8, then he told them, look at verse 8 with me, go to Bethlehem. So he's speaking to the Magi. He says, go to Bethlehem and search carefully for the child. And when you find him, come back and tell me so that I can do what? Well, what did he say he was going to do? Right there at the end of verse 8. Worship. Worship. If you don't know the text, and if you were to guess about whether he's being honest in this moment, I think we would probably all guess together, no, he doesn't really want to worship the guy who's coming to take his job away. That was a lie, and you'll see it very clearly later here. But that's what he tells them. Find the kid, and then come back and you tell me exactly where he is. You tell me exactly how I can find this kid so that I can wink, wink, go and worship him, Herod says. Verse 9, look there with me. Matthew 2:9. After this interview, the wise men went their way, and the star they had seen in the east guided them to Bethlehem. It went ahead of them and stopped over the place where the child was. Verse 10, when they saw the star, they were filled with joy. I like that part. Oh, verse 11, they entered the house and saw the child with his mother, Mary, and they did. So here's what they're doing. This is what the Magi are doing. They bowed down and worshiped him. And then they opened their treasure chests and gave him gifts. And we may have heard about these gifts before: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Verse 12, when it was time to leave, they returned to their own country by another route, for God had warned them in a dream not to return to Herod. Verse 13, after the wise men were gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph, that's Jesus' adoptive dad, appeared to Joseph in a dream. Get up, flee to Egypt with the child and his mother, the angel said. Stay there until I tell you to return, because Herod is going to search for the child to do something very different from what he said he was going to do. What's it say? He's searching for this child so that he can kill that child. And what ended up happening, we have recorded in Scripture and we have recorded in Josephus' historical records, that when he couldn't find Jesus, he just starts murdering everybody. He's muck-ducking all the little boys under 2. Not a happy day. So knowing how sacred and important this precious new baby was, this new prince, this new king, God says through an angel, you guys have got to get out of here. You guys have got to go to Egypt because the slaughter is coming. And so they go, they flee until everything chills out. Herod is eventually gone, and then they could come back. That's the text from Matthew 2, a text that, like I mentioned, we might have heard before. Now, the sermon series that I'm presenting to you over these weeks is referred to as Do You See What I See? That little bumper video that we saw at the beginning of the sermon asked that question, do you see what I see? Kind of reminds me of the song a little bit. I won't sing it for you. But let's think for a moment about what they saw. Those magi, what did they see? Simply, they saw a star, right? They saw this star. And when they see this star, it mentions in verse 2 and verse 9 that it filled them with, in verse 10, it filled them with joy. Anybody can see a star. If you go out tonight and you see a star, I don't know that it's really going to prompt a whole lot of gushy feelings inside. Oh, can you feel it? Oh, it's bubbling up. I doubt it. But there was something about that star, something about that experience for them that prompted them so that they were filled with joy. And that star and that joy led them to see something else. It led them to a person. It led them to a person that they deemed worthy of worship. So when you drop by somebody's house and you visit with them, hey, Merry Christmas. We were just talking this morning about delivering Christmas cards, right? And how cool it is to spend time with loved ones and interacting with them and then getting their cookies. But for them, they didn't just drop by. They didn't just share Christmas cards or eat cookies. They worshiped this person who was there. They saw someone who was different from everyone else. They saw someone worthy of worship in verse 2 and verse 11. Someone or something brought you to Jesus. I'm guessing it probably wasn't a star, but someone did. Some situation did. When you were at some place or in some circumstance in life, someone brought you so that you met Jesus. And that experience that you had is not the same for the person who's next to you. And each of us have people, each of us have circumstances in life that bring us where we have an interaction with God that looks like one thing or looks like another, but not everybody responds in the same way. Those magi see a star, they get filled with joy, they see a person, and they see someone who's worthy of worship. But that is not at all what Herod saw. He saw, according to verse 3, this threat. He saw a big problem when it came to his job. You like your job, you want to keep your job, you're going to fight for your job. He apparently liked his job. He decided to fight in a pretty nasty way for his job because he really felt threatened, not filled with joy, but filled with fear. And he also saw in verses 5 and 6 this prediction of a new ruler. So that's the quote from the Old Testament prophets where he asks people, hey, what do these prophecies say about the new coming Messiah, the promised one? What do they say? And then they quote that there. And so in verses 5 and 6, he sees this prediction all along. You kind of know. It's like getting hired for contract work. And eventually that contract's going to come to a finish, and then you don't have that job anymore. If you have a temp job or if you're doing a particular job responsibility that comes to an end, that was a lot like what it was like for him, but not in a cool way because he didn't see it up front, but it was there. That prediction was there all along. And he sees this prediction of a new coming ruler, and what was he filled with? The very same thing he was filled with when he interacted with his wife earlier. The very same thing he was filled with when he interacted with his sons earlier. He was filled with paranoia. This paranoia led him to do horrible, cruel things, the very same pattern that he had before. And so his claim to come and worship this newborn king was very obvious a lie. Those magi, they said, hey, you know what? We're looking for this kid. And when they finally find him, they did worship this new king. But when Herod said he was going to do that, that was just a lie. So like I mentioned, you and I, we respond to Jesus in different ways. Some of us have had an interaction with God that has changed us forever. Some of us have had an interaction with God, but it didn't really have all that much impact on us, and we kind of went through the rest of our life the same way that we were going through our life before we had that interaction with God. Some people can be quite indifferent, like those religious leaders that Herod went to say, what do the prophecies say about the Messiah? Do we see them going to hunt for the new king? No, they're just like, well, here's a quote from the book. I'll give you the quote. couple different quotes so that you know he's from Bethlehem, and then they just go right back to life as they had been living all along. Here's the news of the promised Messiah showing up, and it had no impact upon them. For the Magi, it had a huge impact on them. It led them to leave what they were doing, where they were. It led them to stop by the gift registry and load up the minivan and make sure that they could find where this kid was located. And once they finally did find him, they're giving gifts and they're giving worship. They're giving their hearts. I believe that had a tremendous and lasting impact upon them. We don't really know what happened with them afterwards, but can you imagine traveling from one nation to another and meeting the Messiah who we've been hearing about and waiting for hundreds of years, and you get to see him face to face, and you get to give him a gift? I don't think you're going back to just regular old Tuesday afternoon after that. I'm guessing. Herod's response was really quite negative here, and we all have some response. Some will worship, some don't, some care, some even attack. So now I'm not talking so much about Herod. I'm talking about people in our lives. Think about your Christmas gatherings that have either just recently taken place or are about to take place. You're going to get together with some people for Christmas, and some of those people are two thumbs up Jesus. Some of those people are like, whatever, if you want to do the church thing, that's fine. The candles are nice and the songs, okay, that's fine. There are also other people who are just really so negative toward Jesus that if you bring anything spiritual up, they'll put you in your place. And they'll say, you don't talk about that around me. That kind of conversation is not welcome here. You just keep that to yourself. That's your own private religion. It's not for me. And they just put this barrier up. They'll even go so far as to attack against the ideas. How could you be so stupid to believe things like that and say things that are hurtful and to attack what we know is true? But some people don't just respond to it in a neutral way. They respond to it in a very negative way. I want you to think for a moment about something that you might think, what's the big deal? Why do I even have to think about this? So stick with me. I want you to think about your reaction to Christmas. Okay, I know I'm talking to a bunch of people inside of a church building and people on a video who are watching a church service. I get that, okay? But I want you to think about your response, your reaction to Christmas. I want us to reflect on this a little bit. So I'm actually going to show you a list of questions here projected up here on the screen, and I'm going to invite you to talk with someone near you about the questions that I'll show you here in just a moment. So before we get to those questions, look around for someone who's seated by themselves. Find someone who's seated by themselves, and then you, because you saw them, you go sit by them so that they know you're a friend who they can talk with. Go ahead and do it now. Go ahead and move. It's not a think about what I said. It's a go and do what I said. So yeah, we're scooting now. I know it's uncomfortable. I don't love doing it either, but I'm going to come and talk with somebody too here. So in a moment, we should all have at least one other person nearby that we can talk with. It's okay if they're right in front of you or behind you, as long as you could talk with them, okay? And let's look together at some of these questions here. I don't want you to worry about finishing all of them. We won't have time to finish all the questions, but look at these questions with me. The first one asks us to explain how you align more with the Magi or with Herod. Thinking about what the Magi did and how they felt, thinking about what Herod did and how he felt. Do you line up a little bit more with one or with the other or both or neither? Second question, when it comes to Christmas, do you see great joy, great fear, great stress, great apprehension, great my lips are breaking out because I'm so anxious about what's going on and I'm going to need extra chapstick? What do you see when you look at Christmas here or something else here? Third question here, does Christmas lead you to worship or does it lead you to nothing? No response, whatever. It's just a holiday. Okay, that's fine. Or does it lead you to something negative? And then secondly here with this question, what should it prompt us to do? So if you think about Christmas prompts me to fill in the blank, okay, but should it prompt me to do that? Or maybe it should prompt me to do something else. The star was bright enough for everybody to see, but we only have a record of the Magi responding to it, leaving home, traveling, and stopping by to see Jesus then. So the next question they're asking us, how much do you pay attention? Because, the stars are up there, and I believe that God is communicating to you and to me, but how much do you pay attention to God? Are you coming closer to him or moving further away from him? And then one last question asks that, are there aspects of fear, insecurity, or opposition that hinder your acceptance of God's activity in and around you? These are our questions. I'm going to give you several minutes to talk with the people nearby you about any or all of these, and let's go ahead and talk with each other. I'm happy to hear you discussing things, and it's good I had a chance to talk with some people for a few minutes. I hate to interrupt you, but I do want to encourage you, if this is a conversation that you find helpful and meaningful, then it doesn't have to stop. You can continue talking about these things during lunch, this afternoon, text somebody, call somebody, get together with somebody, especially if this is something that is having an impact upon your heart, an impact upon your thinking. Then, because my hope is not just that we would hear or read or see something about, okay, that's what the Magi did, but that it would actually affect us. Do you see what I see? Well, some people do, and some people don't. And my hope is that you would be able to see not just a sky full of stars, but you would be able to see a person, Jesus Christ, a person who can make a difference in your life and in mine, and the life of anybody who's willing to actually draw near to him. And I know there's a cost associated with that, but it is my prayer for you and for me and for our community and for your loved ones that we would be able to see what God is trying to show us. I notice a lot more from God when I'm in a position to. I get caught up. I get distracted. There's stress. There's drama. There's responsibilities, there's rhythm in life, and if I'm caught up in all of that, I might not notice what God is doing. But I don't have to be caught up in all of that. I don't have to be sucked into the commercialism like what we talked about, but I can choose to position myself in such a way that I can see what God is showing me. I know he could split the sky apart. I know God could do that. I know he could plop a new star into the sky. He could do that. But for you and for me, it's a lot more likely that we're going to see him when we're looking. When we're looking. Do you see what I see? Let's be less distracted and let's focus on him. For some of us, there's stuff that gets in the way. Stuff that gets in the way of us being able to see what God is doing in our lives. Whatever that is for you. It's probably different from what it is for the person next to you, but each of us have things that get in the way of what God is trying to do in our lives. Fear, insecurity, doubt, sin, a long list of things that could get in the way. Whatever it is that hinders your response to God, your openness to God. I want you to think for a moment before we sing together. If you are hesitant for any reason at all about your openness to God, whatever the reason might be, just set that aside. But whatever the reason, if you're hesitant about your openness to God, who could you talk to about that? Think for a moment about a person that you could speak with about your hesitancy, about your openness to God. And I'm actually going to encourage you to text that person. If you want to do it right now, go ahead. Nobody's going to care. You whip out that phone and start texting right now. Everybody knows what you're doing is you're reaching out to somebody to talk with them about your awareness. Hey, I need to be more open to God. And I think talking with this person might help me. And if you don't have somebody that you can text with about that, you can text me. I'd be quite happy to communicate with you about that. Imagine with me what it would look like if we followed that example of the Magi. Not sitting at home, not just following our regular schedule, not just a regular work day or regular time off or regular retirement. But what if we recognized the activity of God and then responded to it in a way that we were drawing closer to him? What if, like the Magi, imagine if you and I responded to this Christmas season, not with hubbub and purchases and eggnog, but what if we responded to this Christmas season with worship? Is your heart ready to worship? We're talking about someone who is worthy of our worship. Imagine how much better Christmas could be. Imagine how much better life could be if we came closer to Jesus today, if we took care of whatever it is that hinders us, and if that newborn king became our king. Let's pray together.